Hello everyone, I'm coach from SMCA, South Mumbai Chess Academy. Today I'm showing you the game played by five-time world champion Vishwanathan Anand versus recognized as one of the greatest chess player ever, Magnus Carlson. This game played in 2012 Bilbao Masters final. So Carlson was white and Vishwanathan was black. So white started with pawn to e4 and black played c5, a Sicilian defense. White plays knight f3 and black plays pawn to d6. Bishop b5 check. Okay, here are two options for black to avoid this check. That is to block with knight or to block with bishop. Black chose to, block with bishop. Bishop takes bishops and here simply recaptures with queen. The point is behind exchanging this bishop is white wants to deal all the white squares with these pawns and is going to cover black squares with the bishop. So straight away pawn to c4, covering the white squares with the c4 pawn. The insertion of c4 pawn makes for black hard to push the d5 and b5 bricks. Black played knight f6, attacking the e4 pawn, and white defends with knight c3. Okay, pawn to g6 by black, doing the king side development and going for the castle. White plays pawn to d4. There is the only pawn which is the liability, like the backward pawn. The d2 pawn somehow looks the backward pawn, so it looks good to exchange this unhealthy pawn with the black's healthy c5 pawn. Black took it, white captures with knight and simple move, bishop to b7, g7. Trying to castle on the king side, white is ready to castle. Pawn to f3. It's very important key move. The point is to avoid and neglect the knight g4 idea, because sooner or later white is going to play bishop e3 and there will be knight g4. So to rule out knight g4 and strengthening the e4 pawn, white plays pawn to f3. The knight g4 is ruled out and e4 is strengthened. Queen c7. Okay, first of all, at first glance it looks like it's attacking c4 pawn, but really queen is actually placing herself on a good square, because the d7 square already queen belongs only for recapture of the bishop. That's not the good square for queen. From c7 it can have a weakened diagonal, that is weakened because of there is no f2 pawn. The removal of f2 pawn actually made that diagonal weak, so queen can have some good future at b6. And sooner or later there may be a future after pawn to b3, queen can actually go on a5 to have a chance to get on a5 even diagonal. Okay, white played pawn to b3, supporting c4, getting ready to take out the bishop to b2, and queen to a5, taking a charge of this e1 a5 diagonal. Knights need to be supported. Bishop b2, supporting to the knight. And the point is, we can't support this knight with bishop to d2 because it's disconnecting the queen from the center knight. The knight in the center is disconnected from the queen. So bishop b2, a logical reply, and black played knight c6, offering an exchange, which is not good and favorable for white, because after exchanging, the b7 pawn will be centralized at c6 and it will be strengthened. So white continues to castle and black castle. Okay, meanwhile, the thing is, here actually, it's really hard for white to castle. Logically, the c3 knight and the a4 move is available, knight a4. Because if queen goes to b6, it's pinning the knight, and it's really hard to get out of pin. But just because in this position, in this typical line, we have knight a4 resource, attacking the queen and just kicking the queen away from this g1 a7 diagonal. Otherwise, it's really hard to meet it. If you have only knight to e2 square available to support the knight, it happens in many lines, then it's really hard to meet this because there is a pawn to e5 and white lost his knight. So the knight is hit 2 times, and actually we have knight a4 move available. The resource is available to support the knight here. So we can go for castle. So white castles in the game and black castles. Knight e2 played by white. And there is very easy and logical reason, because here in this position, if you see the next move, if you give to black, is going to exchange the knight, and you have to take it with the queen. And then our queen will be exposed to that black bishop. Let's say the normal move, like if give any one move for white, let's say a normal move, pawn to h3, knight takes it, queen takes it, and then maybe something like knight d7, and getting on this diagonal, it's really heavy because 4 pieces standing on that diagonal. So white needs to avoid this kind of positions. Let's play the safe chess, an active chess. Knight e2. If now the knight takes knight, we can actually deal it with the bishop takes knight, and the bishop will face the black bishop. We will have a less tension. In the game, black decides to go rook f to d8, keeping the rook on the same file where the white queen is. Bishop to c3, kicking away the queen from active a5 square. Queen goes to b6, putting the pin on the knight. It's a temporary pin. King moves away, getting safe. And black play pawn to d5. At first glance, when we see, we feel that it is illogical, and it may be a wrong move, because in most of the Sicilian lines, we have to prepare for d5 with something like first pawn e6, and then we go for d5. But here, particularly in this position, we have a tactical resource. Let's say the pawn is recaptured by the pawn. Then we have knight takes d5, pawn takes d5, and then rook takes d5. And this pin over the knight it's really hard to defend the knight anymore, because already the knight is hit in 1, 2, 3, 4 times, and it can be defended only by 1, 2, and 3 pieces. These 2 pieces are unable to defend the knight on d4. And even if someone manages to defend the knight, we can hit the knight by 5th time with rook d8, and even the 6th time with pawn to e5. So definitely it's not a good deal for white. So white, Carlson decides to first exchange knight takes c6. And of course, black can't take with the queen, because there is a simple pawn takes d5 and losing the free pawn. So Anand from black decided to take it with c6. It's white's turn. White played queen to e1, get out of that d-file pin from the rook. And black decides to go rook to c8, because there is a threat. You know, not only the queen is moving away from the file and away from the pin, is threatening to do a skewer with bishop to a5. So black deal it with rook c8, getting away from the skewer and standing on c5, putting pressure on white pieces. Pawn to e5 by white. And here the pawn structure changes completely. So far the pawn structure and everything was focused on the d file, and the tension was available on d file. But suddenly after pawn to e5, everything shifts. The pawn structure shifts. And knight have some options here to move. Let's say h5, e8, d7. h5 is not good because after knight h5, g4, and knight will be trapped. There is no good place for knight to move. All the squares are completely trapped. So two logical moves, e8, d7, and e8 is better than both of them. The point is d7 is having very less options after pawn to e6. Black must take it, and then we have knight f4. But e8 is having an interesting idea. Let's say white plays e6, then black can avoid that exchange by going pawn to f5. I don't know how much resistance black can put it, because anyways the bishop exchange is going to welcome from white, and there is a vacant squares around the black king. And maybe white will plan for something like rook a1 to d1 and hoping for d7 square. And then it's really hard to, cover up this e6 pawn. But in the game, Anand actually chooses to take the pawn, which is quite a positional mistake. And white Carlson manages to maximize it with knight f4. Now the pawn is hit twice. And the tension in the bishop is also there. It's good for white to exchange bishops. So bishop takes bishop, queen captures, and pawn to d4, trying to lock the queen, just stop his attack. So normally, if you ask this position to any good player, they will say, let's go queen e1 and pressurize the pawn on e6. That is a positional idea in this position. But Carlson was thinking something different. He played queen to d2, aiming for h6 square. And then he wants to, reposition knight to g5. Anand played pawn to c5. That is really good because, first of all, it's supporting the pass pawn. Now the d4 pawn is protected pass pawn. And while supporting this pawn, the queen is actually giving support on e6, which is actually needed right now. Knight is attacking. So rook a to e1, following the rule that get all the pieces into the attack, managing the last piece into the attack, rook a to e1. Now two pieces attacking e6, knight to g7, supporting e6. The e6 pawn is supported twice. And here, pawn to g4. Two good things in this move. First of all, the primary reason we have is the pawn is stopping f5 and h5, the knight squares. Second thing is it's making a flight square for the king. Because if you check now, there is a back rank for white king. So slowly there is an improvement in king position also. Many of you might feel it's weakening the king side, but actually if you see the black pieces, there is no harm for white's king side. The white king box or the king side is very, very safe. So pawn g4 logical to support, to stop f5 and h5 primary and making the flight square. So rook to c6, just over protecting the pawn on e6. And white reposition the knight. Knight to h3, getting ready for g5, putting queen to h6. The attack is going to be there on black king. Knight to e8, queen h6, knight to f6, and knight to g5, attacking h7. The point of this knight moving from g7 to e8 to f6, this short journey from knight is made to support and give a backup to h7 pawn, which is logical because the least valuable piece on the board, only 3 points for knight. It's supporting the h7 where two white pieces are engaged. So white is attacking really good and black is also defending at full strength. pawn to d3 by black because there is no other way. White plan is clear. Let's say a normal move by black a5. White plan is very clear. Pile up on e5. Let's go rook e5, then go rook e1, and then take on e6. And then there is a e7 after that, and we will have a logical checkmate there and a lot of pressure on the 7th rank. So black must do something to disconnect this white coordination of pieces. So he played d3, but still we have rook e5. And this time there is a different reason. The reason is tactical. Let's say a normal move from black again, we have knight takes h7, and when knight captures, we have queen takes g6, a tactical reason, check. And king goes to h8, we have a checkmate into with rook h5. You can choose the option which is better for you. In the next game, in the next move, there will be checkmate on h7. To just solve this problem, black deals with this problem by playing king to h8. And now knight h7 will not work because simply after knight takes, queen takes is not with the check. And black can have a time to save his king by going rook g8. And he can actually support in the next move to the knight. So knight takes h7 is definitely not possible, but after king h8, we have rook d1. And you can clearly see how strong white ka position is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And 5 pawns are locked. Only the logical pawn can move is the d pawn, which can be taken in the next move. So black really don't have any defense to simply save the pawn. Rook d6, rook d8. Trying to save the pawn will be failed by a simple tactics of knight f7 attacking the king, and d8, d6 is covered in that fork. So it's impossible for rook d6 or rook d8 to save the pawn. What else can black play? Anand tried queen a6, trying to deal rook d6 with queen takes a2. But white position is very safe here. He don't have to take any small chance also. All the things are in the white side. He can just wait and save every single piece. He played pawn a4. And the position is dead for black. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pawns can't move. Positionally, black is completely killed. And rook takes d3 is unstoppable. And then there will be rook to e3, and the e6 pawn will be taken. Okay, at first glance, when I saw this game, I thought, let's play rook b8. And when rook takes d3, logically, we can save, the next move will be rook e3 and trying to pile up on e6 pawn. So we can go queen c8. And that may be possible, right? To save it, like say after rook to e3, we can have rook b6 supporting the pawn on e6 nicely and guarding the last rank also with the queen. And I thought maybe then white will play something like a5 and still black will manage to at least somehow put a defense on e6. But this is also not possible because after queen c8, there is a tactical shot. Rook d8. Queen takes rook and then knight f7, covering up that queen. So maybe this is the reason black have resigned, because there is no defense for rook takes d3. So the last move from white was a4 and black, Vishy Anand, resigned in this position. I hope you enjoyed the game. Have a nice day. Thank you.